You stayed quiet. And they took that as an invitation, not to help you, not to understand you, to decide what your silence meant for you. They filled it in with whatever made them comfortable. Weakness, probably. Maybe sadness. Something small. Something manageable. Something that confirmed what they already suspected. That you weren't quite enough. And the beautiful part, the really, genuinely funny part, is that they said it out loud. They laughed. They made little remarks. Nudged each other. Felt very clever about it. And you said nothing. Now, most people would call that restraint. They'd call it the high road or dignity or some other phrase invented to make losing feel like a choice. But here's what I've noticed. And I notice things. It's a hobby of mine. Silence in someone who is truly building is the most dangerous sound in the world. Not because it's angry, because it isn't. The ones who laugh the loudest at your stillness are always the ones most terrified of their own. They need noise. They need reaction. They need to know they registered, that they landed, that they mattered, that the world felt the shape of them passing through it. Your silence gave them nothing and nothing. To a person who requires constant confirmation is an unbearable answer. You didn't disappear because you were defeated. You disappeared because you were done performing for an audience that never deserved the show. And somewhere between their last laugh and this moment, something shifted in you without announcement, without a press release, without any of the dramatic gestures that lesser people require to feel real. You became something they don't have a word for yet. And they're starting to notice the silence isn't empty anymore. It never was. Let me tell you what actually happened. Not the version you tell yourself at night. The clean version, with the neat arc and the righteous ending. The actual version. You were in a room, maybe many rooms, maybe for years, and you had something. A perspective, a way of seeing, a quality that didn't compress itself neatly into what the room required. And you tried, didn't you? You softened it. You timed your words more carefully. You watched the faces of the people around you for signs that you were being accepted. That word. Accepted. As though you were a loan application and they were the bank. And somewhere in that process, quietly, without drama, the way the most important losses always happen, you started building a gap between what you actually were and what you were showing. And that gap has a cost. It has a daily tax. Every morning you wake up and pay it before you've done anything else. The laughter came later. Or maybe it came early. It doesn't really matter when it arrived. What matters is what it did. Because laughter, when it comes from people who are threatened by you, isn't really about you at all. It's an auditory reflex. A defense. The sound a person makes when they realize they can't categorize you and that terrifies them. So they reach for the oldest social tool available. Make the unclear things seem ridiculous. You believe them. Briefly. Maybe not fully, but enough. Enough to go quiet in rooms where you should have spoken. Enough to hold back ideas that were better than anything else in the conversation. Enough to wonder in a specific 3 a.m. way that is somehow worse than any other hour. Whether the problem was structural, whether something in you was simply off. And here's where it gets interesting. You know what I've noticed? No. Actually, let me put it differently. I once knew a man, a very serious man, very committed to a very specific idea of what responsibility looked like, who spent years showing up for people who had already quietly decided he was a prop in their story, rather than a person in his own. He kept performing a role. Beautifully, I'll give him that. Exceptional commitment to a part that no one had actually asked him to play. He called it loyalty. I called it an impressive inability to notice when the feeder had emptied. Some habits are harder to break than buildings. But back to you. The silence you retreated into wasn't weakness. You've been told that, or you told yourself that, and it isn't true. It was the only intelligent response to an environment that wasn't safe for you. When an animal goes still in the forest, it isn't giving up. It's reading the terrain. It's waiting for conditions that make movement worthwhile. The problem wasn't the stillness. The problem was that no one taught you to see it that way, so you wore it like a wound instead of a weapon. And while you were silent, while they were laughing, while you were questioning whether the gap between you and the world was your fault, you were also doing something else. You were watching. You were processing. You were storing. Every dismissal became data. Every laugh became a memo about who those people actually were and what they actually required from you in order to feel secure. You were, without knowing it, building a map. Not a map to get back to where you were. That place was a cage with no locks, which is the cruelest kind, because you could leave anytime. But no one ever told you the door was open. A map to somewhere else entirely. The question that sits under all of this, the real one, the one that none of the softer conversations you've had about this topic has ever asked you directly, is this. What are you actually protecting when you protect your silence? Not what do you gain from it. What are you protecting? Because the answer, live to that quiet west is the only true map you have. They called it weakness. They called it passivity. They called it being invisible, being forgettable, not having what it takes to show up in the world the way the world expects you to. They had a whole vocabulary for it, and they used it generously. The way people use a language they didn't invent but have been given for free and feel very fluent in. The word was wrong. What you have is not the absence of strength. It is the refusal to perform strength for people who have no idea what it actually looks like. There is a category of person, and the world is full of them, who mistakes volume for power, who confuses the willingness to be loud with the willingness to be real, who read stillness as surrender because they have never in their lives sat quietly with themselves long enough to discover that the noise they generate is the thing keeping them from knowing what they actually want. You are not passive. You are selective. And in a world that rewards the performance of urgency, selectivity looks to the wrong audience like nothing. The word isn't weakness. The word is precision. And precision in the wrong room has always looked like absence. Here is what this actually is and where it actually comes from. You learned at some point early, probably, the way all the real lessons arrive. That the full expression of what you were did not produce the response you needed. Not love, exactly, or not reliably. Maybe approval. Maybe safety. maybe simply not being targeted. And so you made a very intelligent, very reasonable, very devastating decision. You started editing yourself before you spoke. You became your own first audience, your own first critic, your own most rigorous gatekeeper. And that is a survival skill. Let's be precise about that. It worked. In the environment you were in, it was the correct adaptation. The problem of survival skills is that they don't know when the environment has changed. They just keep running. And the skill that kept you safe in one room starts to hollow you out in every room after it. Because it doesn't distinguish between a room that requires protection and a room that would actually receive you. The silence isn't pathology. It's an old coat you're still wearing in July. The coat served you. You don't need to hate it. You need to notice you're sweating. Now, the people who laughed. Let's look at them for a moment. Clinically, the way you deserve to be looked at. What does it cost someone to mock another person's silence? What does it require? It requires that they have already decided that person is safe to mock. It requires that they have assessed the room, found allies, determined that the social math works in their favor, and only then, after all of that, deployed their little performance. That is not confidence. That is calculation dressed up as confidence. That is someone who needs the room on their side before they'll say anything at all. And you stayed quiet because you were actually thinking you were the threat that required neutralizing. Not because you were weak. Because you were watching them in a way they couldn't perform for. The thing about being truly observed is that it is profoundly uncomfortable if you have something to hide. And most people do. I knew someone extraordinarily committed to the idea of himself as a protector, very invested in that particular performance, who could never quite tolerate being in a room where someone wasn't afraid of him. Not aggressive fear, just unimpressed. He required a kind of ambient deference he'd never had to ask for out loud. When someone sat quietly and simply didn't offer it, he found elaborate reasons why that person was the problem. I always found it instructive. The ones who need the loudest stage are usually the ones with the most to obscure. What the judgment of your silence reveals about them is simple. They needed you to react. They needed you to be legible, predictable, manageable. Your refusal to perform even unconsciously, even out of pain, was a kind of power they didn't know how to respond to. So they laughed. It's the same reason people laugh at things they don't understand. It's not ridicule. It's a disguised confession that something exceeded them. Let's talk about what the silence actually built. While they were performing, while they were busy being visible and loud and confirmed, you were developing something that cannot be taught and cannot be faked. The ability to stay inside an experience without immediately translating it into output. To let information arrive completely before forming a response. To sit with ambiguity long enough to understand it, rather than simply resolving it into something comfortable. This is rare. This is, in environments that matter, genuinely rare. The world is drowning in fast opinions and slow understanding, in people who speak before they've finished thinking, and who therefore never quite finished thinking. You trained yourself accidentally under duress, which is how most real training happens, to do the opposite. The silence you were mocked for is the same capacity that will allow you in the right room to see what no one else in the room has seen yet. To wait for the moment that matters rather than filling every moment with noise. To make exactly one move at exactly the right time in a way that surprises people who have been watching and still didn't see it coming. The laugh always comes before the moment when they realize what they were laughing at. There is a version of this silence that is a cage. Let's be honest about that too, because I don't deal on half-picture as this silence becomes a cage when it is used to avoid rather than to prepare, when it becomes a permanent mode rather than a chosen one, when you stay quiet not because you are building, but because you are forgotten that you were allowed to speak. When the editing you do before every sentence has become so automatic, you can no longer hear the unedited version. When the original signal is so buried under habit that you've lost access to it. That version of silence is not precision. That version is disappearance. And the difference between a strategic withdrawal and a disappearance is this. In a withdrawal, you know where you're going. You have a direction. You are choosing the stillness. In a disappearance, the stillness is choosing you. The question is always, who is holding the knife? A knife held in panic cuts everything, usually including the person holding it. A knife held with intention is the most efficient thing in the world. Your silence, your real silence, the one underneath the fear is a blade. It always was. The only question was whether you were gripping it or whether it was gripping you. Ownership is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to, and that specifically is how you know it's real. The word you have been using is quiet, passive, a description of what isn't there. Replace it. From now on, the internal word is calibrated, not quiet. Calibrated, because that is what it actually is. When you stay still, you are not failing to act. You are selecting the conditions under which action will be worth the cost. Every scientist who has ever produced something real has spent the majority of their time in what looks like inaction. Every chess player who has ever won a long game has made the majority of their moves in their head, invisibly before their hand ever touched the board. You are not missing from the conversation. You are conducting it from a room no one else has access to. And when the thought arrives, the old one, the one that sounds like their voices, the old one, the one that sounds like their voices, the one that says, why can't I just be more? Replace that sentence too. The replacement is this. I am not behind. I am exact. Say it as a fact, not an aspiration. Not an aspiration. A geometric statement. Because that's what it is. Some of the rooms you are in were not built for you. They were built for a different kind of person, a louder kind. A faster kind, a kind that needs less processing time and produces more visible output per minute. And you walked into those rooms at some point for various reasons, and the rooms did their work on you. They made you feel like the misfit, like the one who needed to adjust. Here is the audit. Go through your life and identify the rooms, literal and metaphorical, where you always leave slightly diminished, not exhausted in the good way, the way you get from doing something that cost you something real. Diminished, smaller, like you spent an hour apologizing for existing and have nothing to show for it. Those rooms are not your rooms. That doesn't mean you never have to enter them. It means you go in knowing what they cost. You minimize the time, and you refuse to let their architecture become your self-assessment. A fish is not a failed bird. It is simply in the wrong element when it is expected to fly. The audit is not about burning your life down. It is about knowing which rooms are building you and which rooms are taxing you, and adjusting the ratio accordingly every single week, with the same consistency you'd give anything else that matters. The next time someone reads your silence as weakness and says so, directly or in the way that isn't direct but is somehow worse, here are the two sentences you say to yourself before you respond, or before you decide not to. They need me, T. Oh, react. I am not required to give them what they need. That's it. That is the entire protocol. Two sentences. Not aggressive, not defensive. Just the statement of a very simple fact about the situation, said from the inside, where it matters. You are not required to perform confusion because someone decided your stillness was an invitation. You are not required to justify your pace to people whose pace was never chosen anyway. The response protocol isn't armor. It's simply the reminder. It's simply the reminder that you were never in the conversation they were having. They were having it alone. The posture of someone who has stopped apologizing for this does not look like pride. I want to be clear about that. Pride is loud. Pride is performance. Pride is the thing you do when you are still trying to convince someone, usually yourself. The posture of ownership is much quieter than that. It looks like this: waking up in the morning and not immediately beginning the inventory of your inadequacies. Moving through a room at your own pace and not reading the pace of others as a verdict on yours. Speaking when you have something to say and not speaking when you don't, without adding the internal footnote that explains why to an imaginary audience. It is the decision, not the feeling. You will not always feel it. The decision, made once, renewed quietly every time it is tested, never announced. The ownership statement is not a sentence you say. It is a direction you face. And once you are genuinely facing it, you will find that the people who once laughed either become irrelevant or occasionally, and this is the funniest part, interested. Deeply inconveniently, helplessly interested in the person they once dismissed. Let them be interested. You don't owe them an explanation. You don't owe them a tour. You have somewhere to be. The world was organized, not conspiratorially, not with malice actly, but effectively, around a certain kind of legibility, around the idea that a person's value can be read at a glance, that what you produce in public is what you are. That presence is measured in volume. That speed is intelligence. That the person speaking is the person thinking. You don't fit that model. You never did. And for a long time, you interpreted that as a flaw in you, which was the only interpretation available in a world that only offers the one mirror. But here is what is actually true about you right now. You've been paying attention for a long time. Not performing attention, actually doing it. You have been building something in the quiet that they laughed at. That does not yet have a name because the people who name things are usually the last to understand them. You carry more than you show? You see more than you say. And the combination of those two things in the right moment, in the right room, is not a disadvantage. It is the rarest and most consequential thing a person can bring into any situation. The disappearance they witnessed was not defeat. It was the natural consequence of a person withdrawing from an audience that was never paying for the right show. You were never invisible. You were simply unwilling to perform for people who couldn't afford to see you. And the thing about silence, the real thing, the thing under everything else that has been said in this conversation is that it is not the absence of presence. It is the purest form of it. The presence that doesn't need to be announced. That doesn't require confirmation. That simply exists fully, without apology, without explanation, without the constant background hum of a self that needs to be reminded it is real. They laughed because they saw something and couldn't name it. That was always your advantage. The ones who last longest never needed anyone to hear them coming.